Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we're going to be going over a list of uniques that every so often I'll see in game, and I'll get just really sad after seeing them because either the archetypes that, they're meant for, they're not that good, or they're just not that good of unique items, even though they have good concepts behind them, whether that be bad scaling or just not enough stats on them or too high of legendary potential. Generally, these items are going to be some of the more stinky items per se. So if you haven't already, I'd heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. But with all that being said, let's talk about all these uniques, shall we? Usurper's Mandate is an item that I've loved since it was introduced, and back in the day when most minions weren't just absolute ass, this item was pretty good. Just being able to generate health on minion hit was a way to sustain yourself that wasn't just put on either Vessel of Strife or build health regen, and it was very interesting. Now with the minion melee and spell and ranged affixes, the flat damage affixes, and you can get this with a low amount of LP, this item is actually a lot better than it used to be, but the problem is the skills that it's meant for aren't very good right now. All of the good minion skills are either solo minion skills or they don't need this item. Like, for instance, a good example here is there's like Summon Wolves. Summon Wolves could technically use this if you put like melee lightning damage on it, if you go for the version with the helmet, but it just doesn't compare to like using a one-handed weapon or two one-handed weapons, right, and a shield. So it's just not really there. And then of course all the other builds, like, you'll have totems, you'll have like Vine Bear. Vine Bear is a really cool slot for this. But the problem is like those builds aren't strong enough to make up for the fact of losing their weapon for damage, right? Because like in theory, you could get a 2 LP one of this and you could get like both suffixes with a bunch of flat damage. But the opportunity cost early on is just a little too much to make this even function. I think that +2 to Acolyte minion skill should just be +2 to minion skills, and I think Usurper's Mandate would be a lot closer, but right now, minions in general are just not very good right now. Like, they are just not very good. Most minions right now are in the dumpster. Like, for instance, this would have been a perfect item for the old version of Cold Stone Elementals, but Cold Stone Elementals don't really exist much as a skill anymore other than like, being capped to 9 and all, So Usurper's Mandate is always an item that I want to play with eventually in the future when minions actually get some love. Dark Shroud of Cinders is always an item that I look at and I want to build around, but every single time I do, it just does not end up being worth it. It is a lot of effort to generate fire auras right now. To even generate maybe 10 of them, or 10 to 15, it takes a lot of effort in terms of affixes on your gear and affixes on your idols. And also as well, it's not very easy to get flat void anymore. There is the spear, but the spear itself has a lot of problems, right? So getting flat void is hard. And getting fire auras is hard, which ends up making Dark Shroud of Cinders not very good. I could see a world where this would be very good once like one of those things aren't true, where, getting fire auras would be way easier, right? Or getting, of course, getting access to better flat damage scaling. But overall, just an item that's just sitting here waiting to be used one day once, fire auras aren't terrible. One day, maybe we can have the Void Fire Aura build, or maybe one day we can bring back Void Meteor. But right now, it's just going to sit in my stash and rot, or just get, thrown out of my stash altogether, to be honest. It's not that good of an item, unfortunately. It's just one of those items that's really cool, the concept's really cool, and we're just kind of waiting for fire auras to finally get some love before we play around with it. Elecoe's Ambition is a very strong item on a very bad skill. There's not many skills that you could put 180% more damage on and have it still be terrible, but in this case, it's going to be Acid Flask. If that 180% more damage applied to, like, let's say if I use Shadows, With Acid Flask, this could maybe see use, but right now, since you can only get one Acid Flask for throw, that's not giving you that much damage in comparison to doing like any other way of playing around with Acid Flask. Thankfully, a lot of the nodes on here, I mean, a lot of the affixes are just very generic. Like this can work for a lot of different builds, but the problem is it is a rogue only unique. There are actually throwing builds outside of rogue that could utilize this. Like for instance, Javelin could use this, right? For instance, the +2. Like there's a few builds that could use this, but overall, like it's just kind of sad that Acid Flask is in such a bad spot that even a unique that gives it 180% more damage is very bad. Like it's just kind of unfortunate. I think that if this worked with shadows, if like I went and used Sync Strike and then I use Acid Flask and the 180%, like you'd consume one potion and the 180% would apply to all those, I think it'd be fine. But it's definitely, I don't know. It's not very good. Let's put it like that. It's not very good right now, unfortunately. So I'm going to be showing Gaspar's acuity, but I'm going to be talking about the Gaspar set in general. So the biggest problem with Decimate right now is it just doesn't have enough damage scaling. The concept is cool. The idea of using, when you use a lightning skill, you get access to it. All of that is cool and all. The biggest problem is just like, it just doesn't do enough damage. Even if there is a way to get the set off of these items with like the set crafting, if that's how that works, right? The biggest problem with this is just going to be Decimate's just not a very good skill. Even putting in all the effort to get the Gaspars, like you can just do like Elemental Nova and stuff like that, but Decimate itself just doesn't do that much damage. To give you an idea here, it has 800% added damage effectiveness and 160 void flat, but the problem is, so does Meteor, and Meteor doesn't really see play, does it? Like it does, but it doesn't. You know what I mean? Like it does, but it doesn't. And like that's my problem here is like there's such a long cooldown on it. I think that if this was literally just a chance to cast Decimate when you use said spell, right? And you just get one per cast, I still think that this would be mediocre, to be honest. It would be cool. It would still be mediocre. So the fact that it has a cooldown on it is kind of the problem. It's such a cool animation too that's unfortunately EHG hasn't really balanced item procs on like items in general, like procs in general, because recently, like I said, there's just been giant amounts of power creep, which has led to just, these spells and, like all these procs just not doing enough damage because they have to put cooldowns on them because they would get abusive if they didn't have cooldowns. But I'll be honest, they could make Decimate not have a cooldown and it would still be like pretty mediocre in comparison to other mage builds right now. So it's just like, I don't know. I'm just not necessarily a fan of Decimate currently, but I would love to play it one day when it's actually not garbage. Another item that's void themed, I'm sure you guys can see the theme of void items not being that good right now. So the Sacrificial and Brace gloves, they're kind of interesting. Your critical strikes don't deal extra damage, which is fine. You get a chance to gain a stack of Abyssal Right on crit, right? And then you get a maximum of 10 Abyssal Right stacks. So the biggest problem is you need to put this on a damage over time elemental skill. So like for instance, you could use like Frost Wall. That's an option. You can use like Glyph of Dominion. That's another option. You want to be using a damage over time elemental spell. So like Maelstrom technically counts. But the problem is, if you know the skills that I'm talking about right now, they're not necessarily very good sources of damage currently. Like spell damage over time is in a very bad spot currently. So that on top of the fact that it's a chance to gain an Abyssal Right stack on crit, like if you just gained a stack of Abyssal Right on crit instead of it being a chance, maybe it could see play. But the problem is the gloves not only have a large amount of legendary potential, right? They turn off your crit, so you're not playing non-crit. Like non-crit doesn't really exist right now in Last Epoch. So you get like 140 spell void flat, cool. and then you get 140% penetration per stack. But it only works for elemental spells, and like I said, elemental spells just don't have good damage over time components currently. So maybe if there's a spell that actually does do decent amounts of damage over time, spell damage over time, like for instance, if like Frost Wall ever gets buffed to do competent amounts of DPS, maybe this could work. I don't know, but right now it's just not in a very good spot. So the Ruby Fang Cleaver actually doesn't have that bad of stats currently. It's like okay. It's not the best, but it's okay. The biggest problem with the Ruby Fang Cleaver and the set in general is the fact that poison is bad. This item was designed back in the day when poison was bad. If poison wasn't bad, if poison was bad all the way through and this item was actually designed, that would be like 3% melee poison chance per 1% uncapped fire resistance, right? Like, the biggest problem, if you don't know, over the past few years, poison was like one of the strongest ailments in the game, which meant it kept getting uniques that were mediocre at best. But the reason why they were mediocre is because poison was insanely strong. So it made sense that they were getting mediocre uniques because they didn't need the help, right? But now that they've nerfed poison, all of the uniques and set items and everything that was based around poison all just look very bad. Like, of course, right now you're looking at this item and you're thinking, wow, that looks like ass, Dread. Yeah, but back then it didn't matter because even having a little bit more generic poison chance was insanely strong back in the day. So yeah, right now, currently, poison isn't good, which makes the Ruby Fang Cleaver. Even with the set crafting update, if they manage a way to like allow me to put this on an axe and then like get the set on the shield or whatever ends up happening with that thing, right? However that goes on, I have no idea how that's going to work. But like in general, like it, even if it gave like 3 poison chance per uncapped fire resistance, I still would be unsure of its viability or not, because it is only on melee hit, right? So yeah, that's my current opinions on the Ruby Fang Cleaver. Maybe one day it'll be better. Renegade's Will is an item that if that more hit damage stated like Rive or like Judgment or Racing Strike or Healing Hands or anything other than just Vengeance, this would be a pretty strong item. The problem is it says Vengeance on it. Thankfully, this unique specifically has a lot more strength than you might think because it has 53% increased attack speed on the affix, right? And it also has +5 to all attributes. That doesn't sound like much, but that's 20 attributes. That gets you like 1/10 of the way to like a red ring. That's okay. But the biggest thing about this item is its effective level for legendary potential is 10, which means that like you can get a 3 to 4 LP one pretty quickly if you really care, right? And having this much attack speed on an item is fine. It's just like, I would rather the item just function for the archetype it's meant for. But right now, Vengeance isn't in the place to support an item like this currently. Hazel Root is a very cool item in general. Just being able to get Thorn Shields whenever we directly use a physical skill. It gives you an insane amount of armor, however you're proccing it, especially if you're on a Primos, right? You don't even have to be a Primos to play this, by the way, right? But my problem with it specifically right now is I think the chance is just a little too low. I think if it was like 30 to 40%, maybe it could see a lot more play than it currently does. But right now, it's in this awkward spot where it's on a bad base. So you're essentially forced to go ailments with it because it's just not a good flat damage, okay, for spells. You can use it for melee stuff, but as you can see, it doesn't have good flat damage for that. So if it's going to be on such a shitty base, right, why doesn't it, like, I don't know, like, have a higher percent chance to give you a Thorn Shield? I'd even take 36%. I would take 36%. I'd be happy, because essentially what you're doing is you're giving up a weapon for a defensive benefit, which I think is completely fair, by the way. So I would like to see Hazel Root buff just a small tidbit. It would be such a cool item if it just had just a teensy weensy a little bit more chance there. Now, Abacus Rod is actually a very cool item. It's a very good item as well. It just has a lot of good stats on it. It has like Like, I think like, oh god, like I got to do the math real quick. It's like 86 flat on a one-hander. That's pretty good. And it also has 25% cast speed implicit as well. Like if you do the numeromancy stuff, right? I think all of it's cool. It is on a level 50 potential base, which is not the best, but it's not the worst. The biggest problem with it is just Rune Bolt. If Rune Bolt was a functioning skill in the late game, then people would use Abacus Rod. Abacus Rod is just, this is the problem with the uniques that are based off of a singular skill like this, is if that singular skill wasn't good, right, then this isn't good. Now, of course, what's cool though is you can use this for any build technically. The problem is like it just gets outclassed by better items like Wrong Warp, right? So it just doesn't end up being that good. I think like either Wrong Warp has to get nerfed for this to even remotely see play, or Rune Bolt has to be good. That +5 levels to Rune Bolt could be good if Rune Bolt wasn't shit, right? So that doesn't help either. But it's a cool unique I always love seeing, but I wish actually functioned. Bane of Winter. So Perry the Pig, a friend of mine, he actually hosted a unique tourney. The idea is like you play with the unique and you try to make a build for it and you enter a tourney for it. And the tourney was for Bane of Winter. It was such a cool idea. It's just like the void bolts themselves, they just don't do any damage. Even if you're trying to make the Void Winter bolts themselves do more damage based on your time rot chance and stuff like that, even with that, they just didn't end up being that good, right? Like they just don't do enough by themselves. I think it's such a cool item. Like it even has like a 600% added damage effectiveness for the Void Winter bolt itself, right? Like most of this text and all of this is such a cool idea. It's just the Void Winter bolts themselves are just not good enough per se. And that's just because of the cooldown. You can only get them for 3 times every 2 seconds. And like, I'll be honest, like that's not enough to function. Maybe in earlier corruption, like in 100, 200, 300, like I did. But if you're trying to push up higher, it just didn't end up feeling good. I like the text of added melee damage as spell damage applied to cold and void spells. I really like that. That was cool to build around, but like without, the actual stupid Void Winter bolts actually functioning, right, in a way that made sense, it just makes me sad. Remember, this is on a 2-handed unique spear with an legendary potential of 82. And the proc itself doesn't do any damage. It does like okay damage, but it's like not enough. I think that like if this just said a 42% chance to cast Winter Bolts when you hit an enemy with javelin or a melee attack, right? That was just what it said, and it didn't have the cooldown on it. I think it'd be fine. You could play the javelin build with it. You could play like Shatter Strike with it. Like, I mean, yeah, like you play Shatter Strike with it. You could play like Javelin with it. There's a lot of different ways you could play this item. It's just being plagued by a cooldown. Like, would the game be at a worse state if Void Winter Bolts wasn't terrible? Because like Void Winter Bolts has so many downsides, it's not even crazy. Like 3 times per 2 seconds, it has a chance to happen. It's on a base that doesn't help you. It has very hard ways to scale the Void Winter bolts. It has this 42% of added melee damage applied to spell damage. That's cool, right? But then the Void Winter bolts themselves, they only have a 600% added damage effectiveness, which normally would be enough, but not on a cooldown, in my opinion. I don't know. I really love Bane of Winter, and I like the idea of Bane of Winter. I just don't like the cooldown. Like, I really don't like them trying to balance all these skill procs with cooldowns, because the biggest issue right now is that they aren't giving the spells enough added damage effectiveness to make up for it. Because why do skills do damage in last Epoch? Because of the more damage modifiers in their skill trees. If you don't have the more damage modifiers, or at least easy access to them, then these aren't going to work, right? Now, of course, we have like the more Void Bolt damage per 10% uncapped time rot, but we don't have that much access to it currently. So we'll see. We'll see next patch. Like Sentinel is getting reworked, so maybe they slot in a bajillion like time rot chance everywhere. Who knows? But right now, it's not in the best of places currently. Oh, Vulcanus, Vulcanus, Vulcanus. Speaking about a proc that like actually does enough damage, Vulcanus itself, unironically, actually does a decent amount of damage. That's because it gets a bunch of flat per character level, and it also gets like 8% increased damage per attribute, and it has flat on the weapon, and it has relevant stats on the weapon. This item is very close to being good, but then you see the 10% chance to cast magma shards on melee hit. If I'm to build around the magma shards, am I really going to build around a 10% chance? I don't know if you guys have played with Vulcanus, but like the magma shards don't really do that well per se when you're in clear. Like they're okay, but they're not like the best. They're not so good that like it needs a 10% chance. Like this could go like all the way to like 40% chance. And I legitimately don't think Vulcanus would be that overpowered of a weapon still. I think it'd be cool. I just don't think it'd be that good still, unfortunately. Like I said, item proc items are really cool in concept, but when they're not balanced properly, they all just end up being boring. So Leviathan Carver is a cool item with a cool concept. It's just, it kind of got power crept a lot. Not only is it a level 90 legendary potential item, meaning that you're only ever going to get 1 LP on this thing on average. Also as well, its stats are just outclassed. They're just better items that do what it does better. Like the only thing Leviathan Carver needs is like an extra 100 flat on it. I think if it got like an extra 100 melee physical flat on it, I think it'd be a fine item. But right now, as it currently stands, that it's just not enough, like at all. Like it's just not enough. I think it needs a little bit more spice and it'd be fine, but it's just getting kind of power crept by like other items in the game, especially for how rare the item is and how much of a high legendary potential it has currently. The last item on this list is going to be the Celestial Doom unique abyssal staff. So the idea here is it's much like the Gaspar set where you like directly cast a fire, cold, lightning, or whatever to get a void spell. And this void spell is actually pretty good because it like pierces through enemies and it shoots in a line. That part's pretty good. The problem is like even with what it currently has, it's like a 500% added damage effectiveness item. With those cooldowns, it just doesn't end up being that good. Even with like a primalist that was able to cast a necrotic, lightning, cold, and fire skill, it still felt awful. And it's because why put in all this effort for a proc that only does like maybe 10k, 20k damage on the dummy? That's just so much effort for such a small amount of damage that I'm just kind of disappointed. Like the problem is like the power creep has gotten so strong in last Epoch that for these items that are procs to function, they need to do significantly more than what they currently do. Like the Doom Pulse needs to shoot out like 5 Doom Pulses before I even like think about using it at all. Like it's that bad. Like I couldn't imagine trying to play with this right now, because not only does it give you crit multi per increased mana regen, which means you're playing a 2-handed staff that needs base crit. You need to get base crit somewhere, so that's a downside. +1 flat spell per 10 max mana. Like if you got to like, let's say like 1,000 mana, that's a lot of effort, by the way. That's 100 flat mana. That's not that good. The extra maximum mana is very cool. I like that. I like that part, but it's on a staff without that many other modifiers, so it ain't being used right now. Also as well, remember, it's a 70 legendary potential item. This thing needs to work out of the box. You're only going to get like 1 stat on it, and you're probably going to put flat mana on it or something. So not only does it need to make up for all of these downsides, it also has to make up for what base it is, right? So overall, also as well, mind you, I don't know if you guys know this, but the cooldowns on these spells and all that, all these cooldowns, they don't scale with your cooldown recovery speed, by the way. And if they do, it's probably a bug, but I'm pretty sure they don't. Because right now, as it currently stands, I'm pretty sure none of them scale with your cooldown recovery speed. If they did, maybe this could see play, but even then, the proc itself just does so little amounts of damage that it's hard and it's crazy for me to think about an item that has a proc that has a 500% added damage effectiveness, but it just doesn't end up doing any damage because it doesn't have any more damage modifiers on it. It doesn't have a skill tree. And I think that this is just a generic problem with proc items. They need to be like actually put through the ringer and actually thought about instead of just being slapped on all these items. Like, I really like the idea of Doom Pulse. I thought it looked sick. I really like the idea of Bane of Winter, Vulcanus, like Hazel Root. Like, all of these proc skills are so cool. Like the decimate like items are the best example for this. They're really cool concepts that just don't do any damage. And unfortunately, in Last Epoch and in ARPGs, if something doesn't do enough damage to merit using it in the end game, it might as well just not even exist, which is unfortunate, but that's just how it is. But yeah, that's going to be it for me today. With all that being said, this has been Dread, off to go do something else. Bye.